Welcome, everyone. It's a privilege to be able to address Achenu B'nai Yisroel during such difficult and challenging times. Certainly in my lifetime, I've never seen so much sorrow, so much grief, so much pain. Never seen so many levayas, so many avelim, so many chaylim. And on the other hand, so many tefillos and so many of Achenu B'nai Yisrael coming together to help each other. Very, very challenging times. To make sense of it is the challenge of making sense of life. It's always a challenge. There is a certain sense that maybe our society needs some sort of correction, scaling down our lifestyle. But for those who've lost loved ones, that's not really much of a nechama. It doesn't seem that they are the ones who are the glutens of society, or the show-offs of society. They're not the ones that are the most arrogant or the most extravagant. And for these families, so many, Avei Tziyam Yerushalayim, time of extraordinary challenge to try to make sense of what's going on all around us. To be quite honest, it's an impossible task. Lose a loved one, not be able to have a proper levaya. One of our rebbeim in the yeshiva passed away. He was advanced in age. He was 98 years old. It's painful that he couldn't have a levaya with his talmidim and his family, the proper Kavod achrei. There's a lot of pain, a lot of sorrow, and a limited amount of nicham avelim. Certainly, it's a challenge to try to make sense of what's going on. Sefer Eiv is our go-to book. Difficulties during times of tragedy, but it's a very difficult sefer to learn. Rav Schwab, in his Pirish on Sefer Eiv, coins a phrase that I don't believe I've seen anywhere else. He talks about Akedas Hadas. Avraham Avinu was told to bring his son Yitzchak and sacrifice him physically. That's an Akedas Haguf, sacrificing his son physically, and as Avraham understood, causing his death. The Akedah is the challenge, which we always refer back to during challenging times of physical danger. But there's also something Rav Schwab calls an Akedas Hadas, a time when we're challenged to understand. Akedas Hadas, when tragedies happen and we have no clue, no ability, it's incomprehensible. And he says that's what Sefer Eiv is. 37 chapters in which Eiv and his close friends try to make sense of what happened. And at the end, in Perek Lamed Ches, the Rabbeinu Shalom himself comes with something of an enigmatic message. The message really is that Eifa Yisa B'Yasti Aretz, a man doesn't understand everything. Akedas Hadas. When Rav Schwab spoke about Akedas Hadas, it brought to mind my father, Olav Shalom. He went through the Holocaust and never spoke about it. And growing up, it was not front and center on my mind, my relationship with my father, until one day as a teenager, we made a trip to Eretz Yisroel. And we went to Yad Vashem. And when we entered the Great Hall, and my father saw a mural depicting one of the scenes, well-known scenes of the extermination camps, his face turned white. He trembled. He had to walk out, and he said, "No, I want you to go through and see everything." Then I understood that my father, I would call today an Akedas Hadas, something he would never understand, he never speak about, and somehow he found the strength to still have trust and faith in the Rabbeinu Shalom. My father never went back to his hometown. His father was buried. His father was beaten up by the Nazis. He beat the gas chambers and was buried in a nearby city. And my father did make the trip to go there. As I saw a picture of him standing by the kever of his father was killed when my father was 15 years old. I felt he was coming back a half a century later and saying to his father, I still don't understand, but I did what you would want me to do. I did what needs to be done. I just don't understand. Akedas Hadas. Putting faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't mean we understand. Akedas Hadas. I had a brother, one brother. We shared a bedroom of the 1960s and 1970s. We pulled out the bottom bed of the high-riser, so he and I each had a bed, and we raised it. There was no more space in the room. We had a small room. We shared it. We shared our lives. And then he passed away relatively suddenly. He passed away in a hospital in Pennsylvania. The doctor came in to tell my parents that their son had passed away. Why did he come in? He was trying to convince them to allow an autopsy. My father said, Doctor, you don't understand. We are believing Jews. We do what God wants us to do. If God would tell me to sing and dance, I would sing and dance. And if God says no autopsies, no autopsies. Akedas Hadas extends very, very far. It means to find faith in God and say, Rabbeinu Shalom, I don't understand. What's going on? I have no idea. I don't understand and I won't understand. Many people who've lost loved ones have asked me, what happened to all of the tefillahs? He said so much tehillim. He got a bracha from Gedolim. What happened? Michtam Eliyahu says that sometimes people pass away as an einish, as a punishment. But sometimes it's their mazel. They come to the end of their days. And when we daven for a chayla, we don't know. If it's an einish, the tefillas will work. But if that's all the time he has, if that's his tafkid, the time will come, and no amount of tefillas or brachas are going to change it. The time, a difficult, a challenging time. Akedas Hadas means recognizing all of that. Challenging, difficult. I'd like to say a word directly to those Avelim who are pained by their inability to say Kaddish. Kaddish is our tefillah that gives chizuk, it gives strength to the children, to the family when they hear a son saying Kaddish. It gives a certain amount of strength, and now even that has been taken from us. My Rebbe, Rav Pam, used to tell people, a Perek Mishnayos is worth a lot more than a Kaddish. The way he phrased it, a Kaddish is like sending regards to the nifter upstairs in the Mesivta Derikia. Parak Mishnayos is like sending a letter or a package. Those who can't say Kaddish should sit down and learn a Parak Mishnayos. If it's hard for you to learn it in one shot, split it over Shachris, Mincha, and Mariv. Learn a Parak Mishnayos at Shachris and learn the same Parak at Mincha, the same Parak at Mariv. It gets easier. It's meaningful. The word Mishnah has the same letters as the word Neshama because there's a connection. There's a connection between the learning of a Mishnah and the neshama of the nifter. There's much we can do for niftarim. The most important thing we can do is to continue in the ways and the life that the nifter had. Ultimately, that's what counts. The nifter lives on in those he influenced that remain here. It struck me that it seems that the niftarim are really from our best and most beloved members of society, not just because when people pass away you say nice things. No, they truly are. They truly are. Many Gedolei Yisroel, and among friends, I know some of the most beloved, smiling, happy people. Hard to understand. And then I remembered an episode, Sefer Yeshua, I believe it's Perek Zayin. In the entire book of Yeshua, there's only one time that a battle is lost, and that's the battle against the city of Ai. The Pasuk tells us that 36 Jews passed away. Rashi tells us from the Gemara that it was not 36 Jews. It was Yoyer ben Menashe. It was one great man who was shakel, who had the value, so to speak, of 36 members of the Sanhedrin. So it was one who had the value of 36. So why does the Pasuk say 36? The answer is that the Gezerah on Klal Yisrael was to lose 36 people. And the Rabbeinu Shalom said, if 36 pass away, there'll be 36 Almanis, 36 families of Yisaimim, 36 sets of friends who mourn. Let me take one who is like 36. The damage to family and friends will be limited. During times of Gezeris, this seems to be God's Mahalach all the time. All the time. Most beloved, happiest, they seem to be taken. We all have people we love that have passed away during these few weeks to our great pain. Difficult. Klal Yisrael realizes that this world is just a passageway. It's a prize door to something bigger and better. And when we're faced with the Al-Hamaves, the acts that we don't understand, that we'll never understand, the tragedies of life, the sorrow and grief all around us, we strengthen ourselves to make these moments our finest times, the times of a recognition of the Rabbeinu Shalom, times of a recognition of God's hand, even where we don't understand. Kadosh Baruch Hu accept these karbanis, that they come up to Shemayim, not only be Militzei Yasher for the beloved families, but for Klal Yisrael. We need Yeshuas, we need Nechamis, we need Refuas. May it be a time of Refuah, Yeshua, Nechama, and the ultimate Gula for all of Klal Yisrael. These feelings, I have the privilege to have the program move on to Dr. Norman Blumenthal, the director of Ohel Zachter Chair on Trauma and Grief, a really better known to all of us as the go-to person for all areas dealing with mental health. Dr. Blumenthal.
Speaking, I will cite, obviously, albeit more briefly than Rob did, some Torah sources, but I can only do that with the indulgence of Rabbi Reisman, who's so much more befitting for him to speak on such topics. I also would like to begin. I remember when I was a child, the Rav of my shul used to begin his sermon, before I speak, I want to say something. So before I speak, I also want to express my thanks to Ohel for the opportunity to give such webinars. Acknowledge our Presidium, Jay Kestenbaum, and Mel Zafter. Mel Zafter is recovering, and may have a refuah shlema, and also our CEO, Dave Mandel, and also thank Yitzi Elman, who was really instrumental in putting this together. And I always feel like we have to thank our tech team. As a fellow childhood survivor, I guess I'm a contemporary Reisman, so we can appreciate that our incompetence with such matters becomes all the more flagrant as we're so dependent on it nowadays. And we're very grateful for our tech team, Barry Kennertsburg, who put all this together. Again, I also want to thank Rabbi Reisman for always giving us the bedrock of Torah, as he did now, and also for having the courage to share personal matters, which always makes this more meaningful. As I'm about to speak, and in the climate of the time that we're living, I'm actually reminded of a section of the Torah reading that we read just this past week, when Aaron tragically loses his two sons at the height of a celebratory event. And afterwards, Moshe Rabbeinu gives him the Chama. And then there are two very powerful words as a Balkore. I mean, somehow these words always resonated. It says, Vayidam Aaron. And Aaron was silent. And the Ksaba Kabbalah and the Abarbanel ask, that's not the typical word for silence. The typical word for silence is shtika. It doesn't say Vayishtok Aaron. And they go on to explain in their own ways that shtika means you have something to say, but you choose not to say it, which is a mile in and of itself. Vayidom is that deep, abiding silence when there really are just no words. I'll just read the Barbanel, it's almost poetic. It says, Aval perish vayidam Aaron, the interpretation of Vayidam Aaron, his heart turned around, it was like a stone. And he didn't cry, even mispaid, or in eulogies, like a father would for a son. He didn't even receive the nechama from Moshe. Because there was nothing left to his neshama. And there were no words. And that's why it says Vayidam Aaron, that it comes from this term of this deep, that finds when there really is nothing to say. And I think in the times that we're living with, and I know for myself, I get up in the morning and one of the thoughts I have is, who am I going to hear die this today? It's so painful that probably the best thing to do would be to be quiet. And it really is what this deserves. But I've been asked to speak, and I will. There's a lot of pain here, not only the number of people, and as the Rav mentioned so eloquently, such good people, but the pain that you can't bestow to your loved ones, that Kavod Achron, that's in the title of this talk. That it's our one opportunity to pay back people who are so important to us, who have given us so much. And yet we're deprived of that. And it's often struck me that in a way that's consistent with how what Chazal teach us, because there are other times when we are deprived of at least a Shiva, and sometimes even a full burial or a full funeral. We may know people who have lost loved ones on an Erev Yantav, on an Erev Chag, maybe shortly before, and maybe have an hour of Shiva. Because Hashem tells us there's some things in life that are more important than our grieving. I remember a friend of mine from college whose mother died on Tanis Esther, and the Levaya was on Purim, and they couldn't have a Levaya. He was deprived of that Levaya. And again, because there are things that are more important than our grief. And obviously Hashem, for ways that I can't fathom or even remotely understand, Hashem's telling us that now we're not allowed. We're being deprived of having that full opportunity to have a right kind of, the kind of levaya, the kind of pur that we're used to having. And that's our, again, as the Rav said so well, that's our submission to Hashem and the recognition that in ways that are beyond our comprehension, we can't we can't have this. And so it's a double nechama. We have to sort of give over comfort, nechama, to our friends and our family, not only for their loss, but for not having that opportunity to have the honor, or they're able to give over the honor to their loved one. And the fact that our presence is so compromised, although we have to be grateful that we have at least the technology, but the fact that we have to watch a levaya, if there is one, on Zoom, or we have to pay a Shiva visit online, really takes away something very important, which is part of grief. Because grief is intensely interpersonal experience. I'm reminded when my uncle died, and after the funeral, I wanted to go over to say to my aunt, and it was a rainy day, and she was walking with an umbrella, surrounded by her children and her children-in-law and her grandchildren. And she looked up, she saw me, maybe knowing that I do grief work. She said to me, "You see, Norman, I'm cocooned." And that's what we do. We cocoon the people, but we can't. It's so hard to do that online. In fact, not accidentally. In English, the English word for nechama is comfort. Comfort comes from the Latin fortis, which means strength and powerful, and com means with, which means that we're being powerful, we're being strong with someone. Germans, as they only can, the word for consolation in German is Trauerbegleitung, which there's no English equivalent, but roughly translated it means walking alongside. Just that presence, just being with someone is so comforting, and we don't have that. I'll give you an example, two examples, meaningful examples. One was, I remember many years ago when I did a weekend, Lorelena, for parents who lost children. And one woman had driven, one woman and her husband, who had lost a 13-year-old son, had driven from the Midwest to the Catskills to attend the weekend. And it was like, obviously, a 15, 20-hour drive. When she arrived and she pulled up and she walked in and she saw people milling about, and she said to herself, everybody here lost a child. And she started to cry. But just being in that sviva, just being that atmosphere, already was comforting for her. There's a beautiful piece that I've quoted a few times, and I understand my friend and colleague, David Pelk, has also quoted it, so you may have heard it already. But there's a book called The Natural History of the Piano, written by Stuart Isaacoff. And he writes the following story. In 1804, the pianist Dorothy Ertmann, who had studied Beethoven's works with the composer, lost her young son. Mrs. Ertmann was so stricken that for weeks she was unable to weep. Hearing of her grief, Beethoven invited her to his house to offer his condolences, though he said not a word. Quote, he played for more than an hour, Stuart Isaacoff tells us, until Ertmann began to sob. When she told the story years later to Felix Mendelssohn, she said that Beethoven's playing, quote, told me everything, and that last brought me comfort. And that's what we do when we comfort, we share, we join, we play music. And it's, by the way, also, and this is so important, I'm learning this myself now as we go through this, so important to validate people's pain, not to try to do away with it, which people try to do. We say when we, Ashkenazim, when we leave the Beis Avel, say, Malcham Nachem Esem Esot Shablet Tzim Yerushalayim. The question, why do we bring up Tzim Yerushalayim? What's that? A person lost a parent, a sibling, a child. Why are we bringing up Tzim Yerushalayim? And I think my own thinking is that when we meet with someone, we have to share in their grief as best we can. So we conjure up, we mobilize the grief that all of us have, which is the loss of the Beis Hamikdash, so we can share in their grief. And I will tell you, and I've heard this story many times, especially from people who've had lost children or suddenly lost young ones, not the more natural expected type of loss, that sometimes the most comforting visit were people who just came and cried with the bereaved. I remember one person who lost a 2-year-old daughter under very tragic circumstances, and he told me the most comforting visit was someone, as he put it, a lot of life experience, who came. Because whoever it was, could people please mute their phones or computers? Very disturbing, the noise in the background. Anyway, but he came, this older man came, he worked his way up. He asked to see a picture of Leah Aleha Shalom. He looked at the picture, he cried for 10 minutes straight. He handed the picture back. He said, "Makam," and he left. He said that was the most comforting visit. Another person told me who also lost a child that his chavrusa from yeshiva drove from Baltimore to New York, sat, cried for 10 minutes, said the Hamakam and left. He said he drove 8 hours for a 10-minute cry, but that's what is important. That's what's comforting. And again, it's so compromised as we are online. And again, I want to just also mention, please don't try to do away with people's grief and pain. They need their pain. Don't give them divrei Torah, although albeit it's all true and powerful, but that's not what they need to hear at that point. And also, this drives me crazy, and I just have to mention it. When you pay a Shiva visit, it's important to talk about how the person lived, not how they died. And so often we sit in the base and you hear, oh, he died from this disease. He went to that hospital. Was it this? Did you go to that doctor? His death, he might have lived 103 years, and 103 of them minus 2 weeks, he was living. In the last 2 weeks, he might have died. That's not important. Far more important to talk about how they lived, as I'll get into in a minute. And also, hey, and this is what's very important now when we're limited to a two-dimensional connection. Read the other. And now we're going to have to use our eyes even more so, because it's all we have. We don't have the smell, the sense of the whole area. Look at them in the eye and see if they want, if they've had enough, if it's time to check out. And by the way, very important, that the extent to which you extend condolences have to be commensurate with the relationship you had before the death. Sometimes because we feel bad for the person, so we stay longer, or we dominate the Shiva, and if we're not, that's not helpful. And sometimes it's appropriate for us to spend a lot of time if we were a close friend or relative. Sometimes it makes more sense just to briefly stay and listen and then say the Hamakam. That's more comfort than overextending your stay. But sometimes you have to read the Ohel to know what they want. And again, we're limited to this two-dimensional cues. But I think there's one, and I'd like to maybe sort of conclude with this. There's one way in which we can still offer nechama, and a very important part of the comforting process, that we're not limited anymore, and we can do all the more so. And I would like to just read you two quotes that sort of capture this. One is from Dr. Craig Vigio, a famous bereavement specialist. He says, "No one we have ever loved can totally disappear from our lives. Our loved ones live on in our gestures, our mannerisms, our beliefs, and our feelings. The deceased leave their mark on our very being. As a result of this internalization process, the influence of our loved ones extend far beyond death." And another very famous bereavement specialist, Thomas Addick, writes, "The central challenge as we grieve is moving from a life where we love them in the presence to a new life where we love them in the absence. Nothing is more difficult, nothing is more important, and nothing is more rewarding." And what these two people are telling us, and which again Chazal knew so well, as you shall see shortly, that a relationship doesn't end when someone dies. A relationship changes. The relationship shifts from one of a face-to-face relationship, of a corporeal relationship, to a relationship of memories, to a relationship of legacies. And that's why Shiva is so brilliant. Because if Shiva is done right, we launch this process, we launch this change in the relationship by allowing the bereaved to talk about their loved one, by allowing the bereaved to share stories. And that's, by the way, sometimes what I'll do when I'm visiting someone. I'll just say to them, I'll walk in, even if let's say it's a more typical loss, I'll walk in, I'll just say, "Tell me a story about your father." Or just say, "Where was your mother born? When did they come to America?" And especially a story, because a story, if you think about it, is a handful of words that captures a lifetime. I can share myself, I'll just tell you something that I learned. In fact, I learned why it was important to have an audience. My mother's a survivor, like Reisman, the father. Mother survived 7 concentration camps, lost her entire family. My father was more fortunate. My father was a Yekka who got out before the war. And when my parents got married, my father was mevater on all his minhagim and ran our house just like they would in my mother's family, which is more Hasidish. Our home sounded like it was straight from Galicia, with the Zmiras, even how we made Kiddush had changed. Because my mother lost everything and he wanted to preserve her traditions. Now, I grew up with that. I didn't think it was anything special. And when I told that when I was sitting Shiva for my father, people were amazed. And I realized how special that is. And that we can still do online. And we can still ask for stories. We can ask to know the person. I often tell people, if you want to know whether you paid a Shiva visit right, when you walk out of the Beis Ohel, do you know more about the person who died than when you walked in? Is that person more familiar to you than he was previously? And when that happens, then you did Shiva right. And I want to mention also, and I said that we can still do that. Not only can we do that now, but it becomes very important to do that not only now when we're grieving, but even years from now. Because those memories, and one of the fears of someone who loses a loved one is the loved one's going to be forgotten. And obviously the actual types of, Nichem Avelim, the Hamakom, and you can only say them in this prescribed period of time, halachically. But if a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you meet someone who lost a loved one during this period, and you share a memory, and you tell them how you're still thinking about them, that is tremendously, incredibly comforting. By the way, all the more so if it's a young person, because they don't leave progeny, they don't leave children. So this is something we can still do, and this is a very important part of the Nechama process that we can do. Let me just conclude by saying that maybe, we're all looking for silver linings, for lessons we can learn from this, how we can grow. Maybe the silver lining will be that as we try to compensate for what's missing in our ability to do Nichem Avelim and to grieve our loved ones, we'll be able to all the more better do it when hopefully soon, God willing, we'll be able to go back to the regular ways of extending condolences. And so we should take the lessons in terms of what's important in Nichem Avelim and how do we honor those who are departed and apply them all the more when all this is over and we can actually do it in person. And again, I thank everybody for the opportunity. I thank Reisman and Ohel, and I hope and pray that in the zechus of everything we're doing, that those who have not been afflicted should stay healthy. Those who are should have refuah shlema, and whatever we're learning and growing should be a tribute to those very special people, as Reisman mentioned, we've lost during this time. I'll mention very quickly those who are suffering or struggling with something more personal, need some more individualized attention. We can provide it through Ohel. We have basically a virtual office, free of charge, total confidentiality between 10 and 12 during the day and 8 to 10 at night. It's accessible. If you go online, there's a receptionist greets you, takes down just basic information. You go into a totally confidential waiting room, and then a staff member will attend to you. The access, that Therazum, we're calling it, can be accessed through the Ohel website. There's a special COVID-19 section. You can get that. We also have a special designated email if people need, either has very specific questions, or if you want to speak to someone like myself or one of the members of my team. The email address is coping with COVID-19 at ohelfamily.org. That's coping with COVID-19 at ohelfamily.org. Again, it's accessible on our website. I see there's a question on the chat, which I'll read, and then I'll ask Reisman if he wants to answer, if I should answer it. What do you say to parents of a child during Shiva? Again, this Rabbi Reisman one, I want to give Reisman, I'll address it, or?
I'm not sure if I'm unmuted.
Yeah, you are, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Parents of a child, I do, as Dr. Blumenthal just said, I think it's important to recognize that to be comforted on the loss of a parent is natural. We all expect to outlive our parents. But on the loss of a child, it's especially hard. Rabbi Kevurah writes on a halach in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says that if someone loses his parents and has an inheritance, he makes dayan emes on the passing and shechianu on the inheritance. Zakt Rabbi Kevurah, but if you lose a child, there is no shechianu. It's a very difficult and painful time. Sas nechama we have and losing a child is the knowledge and the understanding that whatever brief time he was given to be here is a time that he shared with us, and we were able to give him joy, to give him frumkeit, to give him a meaningful life. And with that, we do like David HaMelech. David lost a child, and he said, he's not coming back to me, but I will be going to him. Life is short. For eternity, we're together. A parent and a child are always together. The grief on the loss of a child is something that must be recognized. And as Dr. Blumenthal said, when people come to be Menachem Avel and say the wrong thing, say things that make it sound like a normal loss, it's all the more painful. Empathize. Dr. Blumenthal, please add or correct as you see fit.
There's very little to add. The only thing I would mention that I think is important, as I alluded to earlier, we talk when someone elderly dies, we mourn the past, we mourn the life they had. When someone young dies, the people who are grieving are mourning the future. They're mourning the life that they dreamt for their child, that they looked forward to. And I think it's important for us as a community to know that when the contemporaries reach milestones, how heart-wrenching that is when the classmates are bar mitzvah or start go to Eretz Yisroel or get married. Each one of them, even though it might be years later, are like a knife in the heart, and we have to be sympathetic. Like sometimes people pressure it, the parents or friends to come to the wedding and etc. And sometimes they can't. We just have to be sympathetic to that. I don't see any other questions on the chat. I don't know if that was the intention, whether there was supposed to be questions and answers, but certainly I know that Rabbi Reisman is always available for everyone, and I can certainly speak for myself that I'm available as well for anybody who has specific needs or questions. Okay. And
I would like to add my thank you to Ohel and to the entire Ohel staff for always being available. For me personally, when I need their help, when I need the help of Mispalim, and for all of Klal Yisrael, where we know of many, many simchas together.
Amen. Okay, everyone should be well. Thank you. Okay.